Following the Minamoto clan's defeat at the First Battle of Yuji in 1180 C, a young and talented leader named Minamoto Yoritomo assumed command. Yoritomo successfully repelled a massive Taira army sent to punish him. Under his leadership, the Minamoto launched a stealth attack on the Taira camp located near the Fujigawa River, adjacent to Mount Fuji. Their efforts were aided by a flock of waterfowl that flew over the Taira camp and caused alarm, transforming the small surprise raid into a decisive rout. Yoritomo had a cousin named Yoshinaka, who fled the Taira clan and took refuge in Shinano province, located in the mountainous interior of Japan. Along the Nakasendo road that ran through Shinano flowed the river Kiso. Yoshinaka changed his surname from Minamoto to Kiso. In 1180, he learned of the Minamoto revolt in Kyoto and received a copy of Prince Machihido's imperial proclamation, which urged all just men to rise up against the Taira clan. This gave legitimacy to the rebellion. Yoshinaka was not one to be outdone by his relatives. He raised an army from his tough mountain men and attacked and seized all lands owned by the Taira family or their supporters in the provinces of Shinano and Echigo. He carefully avoided going towards the southeast, where his cousin Yoritomo held influence. Instead, he was emboldened by his successes and turned towards the west, invading Echu, Kaga, and Echizen. He swept all before him and stopped only when he was scarcely 60 miles from Kyoto itself. The enemy that had halted his advance was none other than famine, which had struck both friend and foe alike. After 2 long years of fighting over the precious rice lands of Japan, the rice crop around the capital had been severely depleted. The fields had been looted and burned by both sides, and even the farmers had been conscripted into the armies. As a result, the Taira clan was forced to retreat to Kyoto, while Yoshinaka returned home to the more prosperous Shinano, leaving garrisons of troops at strategic points along the coast of the Sea of Japan. Meanwhile, Minamoto Yoritomo, who was based in Kamakura, fared better, as the heartlands of the Minamoto family had not been ravaged. However, launching an attack on Kyoto was out of the question, as no army could survive in a country stricken by famine. As a result, the year 1182 passed without any further warfare. As the effects of the famine subsided, the Taira clan began to think about how they could punish Yoshinaka for his depredations. In 1181, the leader of the clan, Imperial Grandfather Taira Kiyomori, had died of a fever, his last words being, "Place upon my tomb the head of Yoritomo," but his successor looked far less capable than he had been fulfilling his last request, or even of chastising Yoritomo's wild mountain cousin. His eldest son had predeceased him, so his second son became the new clan chief. Taira Monomori was so incompetent that was rumored that he was not a true Taira, but in fact the son of an umbrella merchant. The expedition to the north against Yoshinaka was not to be led by the questionable Monomori, but by his son, Taira Koromori, whose previous experience of war cannot have given anyone grounds for great confidence in him. It was he who had led the army against Minamoto Yoritomo in 1180, and had been forced to flee from the waterfowl of the Fujigawa. The second in command was his uncle, Taira Michamori, who bore the title of Echizen no Kami, or feudal lord of Echizen, the province which Yoshinaka had conquered, so it was no more than appropriate that he should play his part in the noble undertaking. With them were 5 other notable family members: Taira Tsunemasa, Kiyofusa, Tamanori, Tadanori, and Tamamori. Taira led a group of well-trained samurai who had previously fought for the emperor and in the early battles of the Genpei War. However, war and famine had depleted their numbers, and they needed more troops for their northern campaign. To do this, they recruited workers from Taira lands, leaving their estates empty. The total number of troops recruited was supposed to be 100,000, which is an impossible total that exceeds even the largest armies of the 16th century. Even if this figure were divided by 10, it would still be difficult to determine the number of soldiers who actually arrived and how many were just names on a list. Despite this uncertainty, the Taira High Command seemed content with their army, and they set out from Kyoto on May 10, 1183. Yoshinaka, meanwhile, remained in Shinano. He had recently been joined by another Minamoto veteran, Yuki, who was his uncle. We can regard him as Yoshinaka's second in command. Another character who rode with Yoshinaka deserves mention. This was his wife, Tamo Gozen, an almost unique example of a female samurai. She is recorded as having been both beautiful and brave, and as having fought by Yoshinaka's side in all his battles. Yoshinaka was also always accompanied by 4 faithful companions, known as the Shaitan. Their names were Amai, Higuchi Kanemitsu, Tate Chikatada, and Ninoe Yukichika. In March 1183, Yoshinaka received news that an army was approaching to confront him. This army belonged to his cousin, Yoritomo, who was the head of the clan. Yoritomo believed that there could not be 2 leaders in the clan and wanted to challenge Yoshinaka. Yoshinaka decided to approach Yoritomo in a peaceful manner. He sent a message stating that if the 2 sides joined forces, they could defeat the Taira clan. If they continued to fight amongst themselves, they would be weaker and the Taira clan would be able to defeat them. Yoritomo understood Yoshinaka's message and withdrew his troops. Yoshinaka assured him of his good intentions, and the 2 sides avoided further conflict. According to the account in Heike Monogatari, the Taira army was poorly organized and suffered from rampant desertion. They had failed to plan for adequate supplies of food, leaving them to forage for sustenance just 9 miles from Kyoto. The soldiers were described as pillagers, wreaking havoc on their own lands in Taira territory, where they had forced farmers into service. As they passed by Lake Biwa, 2 commanders pushed forward while their subordinates indulged in sightseeing and other leisurely pursuits. Meanwhile, the Taira's advance guard reached the border of Wakasa province, which sat at an elevation of 2,500 feet atop a high ridge. From there, the Taira followed the coast of the Sea of Japan, a longer but safer route than an inland one. The Minamoto clan's first defense was a simple fortress called Hyuchi, built on rocky crags and well defended. The Minamoto had built a dam to create a moat, which hindered the Taira assault. However, a traitor fired an arrow, revealing how to breach the dam and run off the water. Hyuchi fell on about May 20th, and around 5 days later, the Taira troops entered Kaga province to meet another Minamoto army at Ataka. The Taira emerged victorious, and the Minamoto retreated. Despite this, they were undeterred. The battle provided Yoshinaka with valuable information, allowing him to learn the strength and direction of the Taira army. Their route bypassed the mountainous interior, turning east across the narrow neck of the Noto Peninsula, and onto Yoshinaka's territory of Echu province. It was also likely that they intended to cross the mountain range by the pass of Kurikara. Yoshinaka's army advanced to Kurikara from the east, and observed that the Taira were approaching the summit of Tonamiyama up the pass of Kurikara. Yoshinaka had a plan, and for it to work the Taira had to remain on the top of Kurikara Pass until nightfall. So, he erected 30 white banners on Kurosaka Hill, about a mile away, to make the Taira think they would be faced with a vastly superior force when they descended. The Taira commanders drew the conclusion he intended, and decided to rest on the safety of the mountain and water their horses. While making his preparations near Kurosaka, Yoshinaka observed a Shinto shrine among the trees, which turned out to be dedicated to Hachiman, the god of war, who was the patron of the Minamoto clan. This was a very good omen, so Yoshinaka visited the shrine and paid his respects to the deity. After dividing his forces, Yoshinaka sent one detachment on a wide sweep to approach the Taira from the rear. He also detached 3 units to conceal themselves at the foot of Kurikara Valley, which lay beneath the pass, while he held the rest centrally. Yoshinaka's challenge was to cover all these movements while holding the Taira in position. His solution was daring and amusing. He would fight a formal and stylized battle. This would conceal his maneuvers while confining the Taira to a small area until night fell. Yoshinaka knew his history and the demands of samurai tradition. The battle would begin with a duel of arrows, followed by individual combat. The Taira would concentrate fully, hoping to earn a name in future epic poetry written about them. The scene was set for an epic battle between 2 armies, both standing firm at a distance of approximately 350 yards. However, neither side seemed willing to make the first move. After a while, 15 skilled samurai from the Minamoto clan stepped forward, positioning themselves between the armies. Each samurai fired a signaling arrow towards the Taira lines, which had a unique wooden head with perforations that created a whistling sound as they flew through the air. In response, 15 Taira warriors fired their own signaling arrows. This exchange continued with 30 samurai from the Minamoto advancing and shooting arrows, which were then countered by 30 Taira warriors, and so on, until 50 to 100 warriors from each side were engaged. The combat was a magnificent display of martial prowess, with both sides demonstrating their skills in a battle of archery and swordsmanship. The Taira samurai, who were well educated and aristocratic, had grown up hearing tales of their ancestors' heroic feats in battle. They relished the opportunity to showcase their military skills in the most traditional and honorable way possible. It was an extraordinary display of bravery and martial arts, which was both awe-inspiring and a complete waste of time. On the fateful day of June 2nd, 1183, a fierce battle raged on between the Minamoto and the Taira. The day was filled with challenges and brave deeds that would later be retold as tales of legend. The combat took place just below a sloping hill, which the Minamoto found themselves unable to leave, thanks to the Taira's unyielding defense. The Taira, however, had little to fear as the southern ground from their position sloped down sharply over jagged crags into a deep valley. The Minamoto couldn't attack the Taira from this direction, and they knew it. Yoshinaka, the leader of the Minamoto, had other plans. Instead of attacking up the Kurikara Valley, he intended to force the Taira down into the same valley, turning it into a death trap. The narrow paths into the valley would be the only way the Taira could go, making it easier for Yoshinaka to trap and defeat them. In Japan, during early summer, the sun sets around 6 p.m., and there is no twilight. It was during such a time that the encircling force of Yoshinaka arrived at the rear. They were well supplied and carried many more banners than a small mobile force would usually carry. The Taira, who were caught off guard by this surprise, faced another shock in front of them. Yoshinaka had learned about his cousin's successful use of waterfowl in the Fujigawa. He decided to use the same trick, but with a stronger stimulus. His men had rounded up a herd of oxen and tied torches to their horns. The torches were lit, and the enraged oxen charged off along the pass. Some Taira samurai were knocked off the path by the frantic herd. Meanwhile, the soldiers on the northern slope, who had been peaceful until then, rushed forward with screams. The Taira samurai had nowhere to go except down into the valley of Kurikara, which they believed had a safe exit. However, the paths petered out, and Yoshinaka's detached forces were waiting for them in the dark. In the confusion, thousands were killed, and one senior Taira commander met his death when Higuchi Kanemisu killed Taira Tamamori in the pursuit. According to the Heike Monogatari, as those behind could not see those in front, they thought there must be a road at the bottom of the valley, and so the whole army went down one after another, son after father, brother after brother, and retainer after lord, horses and men falling on top of one another and piling up in heaps upon heaps. In this way, some 70,000 horsemen of the Taira perished, buried in this one deep valley. The mountain streams ran with their blood, and the mound of their corpses was like a small hill. Even to this day, the marks of arrows and swords can be seen in this valley. Kiso Yoshinaka emerged victorious against the Taira army, and despite further defeats inflicted upon them, the remnants of the army, along with a smaller group of their original force, eventually made their way back to Kyoto. This triumph marked a significant turning point for the Minamoto, as the Taira were compelled to abandon Kyoto. Shortly thereafter, Yoshinaka entered the city in triumph, becoming the first member of the Minamoto family to do so. Kurikara served as a watershed moment in the Genpei War, foreshadowing what was to come.